My name is Lydia. My name is Lydia Moyo. I'm a PhD student at UJ, Department of Sociology. I'm looking at, this is my first year actually. So I'm looking at the experiences of the vendor migrants in South Africa, the Zimbabwean vendor migrants in South Africa. I'm also a researcher at the Center for Sociological Research and Practice. So yes, welcome to our second seminar once again. So we are going to have two speakers and then our discussant, Dr. Spello. So I'll just share briefly with you about the research that we did in Soweto about electricity crisis, just a little bit before I can hand over to our two presenters. So when we were doing research in Soweto about the electricity crisis, we found that people, they are now using other alternative sources of energy instead of electricity because they do not have that electricity. And these other alternative sources of energy, they are very expensive as compared to using electricity. We are talking your gas, your paraffin, yeah, firewood, which has even rendered risks in people's lives because people have to go in the woods to look for firewood, of which even the firewood is now scarce. So people are now afraid even to go there alone. You need to have somebody to accompany you there. So people are actually complaining about that. So also the lack of sorry about that. Also, the electricity crisis has led to social breakdown of social lives, economic lives, and disintegration within communities. I hope you can see me because I've been asked to start my video. And also, there is no more order in people's daily lives because people, they don't know what to do when they wake up. Their lives have been disrupted as compared to when you know that when I wake up, I do 1, 2, 3, but because you don't have electricity, some they've been working at home, so you need to plan other means of sourcing your energy. So COVID also, we found that COVID also has burdened people's life even more because we have been advised by the health experts that we need to stay warm in these COVID conditions. But because they do not have electricity, they are even exposed much worse than other people. I think I will leave it there. I will talk as we go on. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Before that, I would like to welcome the honors class of Dr. Luke Sunwa, who have joined us, the urban class for Dr. Luke Sunwa. So I would like to encourage them to participate, and they can chat in the chat box, and they can also talk, not only chat, they can ask questions when we open the floor for everyone to ask questions. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who is Cleopatra Shezi from Soweto. I think her experience in this research, she resonates with it because she's a resident and a researcher as well in that area. So she's going to share much more rich information with us. So Cleo she's a fighter for Soweto electricity crisis. She's also an environmental activist, and she's also a socialist at heart. She's also part of the research team at CSRP. So Cleo, I'm going to give you 15 minutes. So over to you, Cleo.
Thank you, Comrade Lydia. I would like to greet all of you. Dumelang, Dimatekwane, Sanbonani. So I'll start by unpacking, maybe Comrade Trevor, if you can put my photo number 1, so that, because I'll be starting from there. So I'll be speaking on 7 points, point number one, it's working class small business are affected by pandemic and electricity. No, not that one. There's other one. Thank you. So why, maybe people, they will ask themselves why one is being chose to put that photo. So as our chair has stated that we did a research almost the entire Soweto, and we visited also small business owners. So as you see those photos there, the question that I put across my mind while I put that photo was working class small businesses are affected by pandemic and electricity crisis. So example photo number one, it's a business whereby they are selling food there at Winnie's place. And Winnie stated that firstly, they were unemployed and they didn't have means and ways of how to generate income. Now that they had a plan of starting a small business as a Black, strong, brave woman. So she was paying electricity via prepaid, and on a monthly basis before the pandemic and before even the electricity crisis, she was paying something like 1,800 a month. But now, because of electricity issues, and they don't have electricity at all, while still they are on prepaid, they are spending something like 2,600 a week for paraffin to feed or to generate heat to cook, as you see those pots there. And as she elaborated that she is spending so much in order to make means and ways of cooking and feeding those Prama stove. So it's very difficult for one, that we all know that we are in a high rate of unemployment. Now it's pandemic, people, they lost their jobs, they were retrenched. And now the issue of electricity, it's also a challenge for one. But better because they also thought of having other means of generating electricity rather than relying on Eskom or city power. So that was my example about Winnie. Yeah. So another issue that I have to raise with Winnie is that a liter of paraffin, half a liter of paraffin, it's 20 rand per half liter. So you can imagine they have 5 Prima stove and they have to cook every day. How much will that be? So the economic life of a Black business people, it's also affected by the electricity crisis. Then coming to my point number 2, which is budgeting for the sustainable of the mass business is no longer predictable. Firstly, Winnie will tell you to say, okay, in a process of a week, because now I know for a fact that electricity won't give me challenges, I'm going to get a profit of so much. But now, with no prediction, because of electricity crisis, she can't even predict on how much a day is she getting as a profit, because she must make it a point that there is other means that she uses to generate electricity. So this is we are not faced with pandemic period only for COVID, but electricity crisis on its own, it's a pandemic. May I please move to my other point, which is the last point based on the business and suffering, is to say being a breadwinner is not easy while fighting for human rights to dignity. I think we all know that having electricity is a human need and not a want or a luxury need. Thank you, Comrade Trevor. Then on my second slide, we have Mimintsi Bulwane. Why I chose that photo, it's because when you check somewhere there at the back, there are 2 pots, solar candles. In Sunnyvale, they had no electricity. It's close to a year now. And as we were doing research in Sunnyvale, we interviewed Umam Maria Matawa. Umam Maria Matawa is a single old woman. She is 64 years old, and she is looking after 4 kids and 6 kids and 4 great children, with a surviving out of social grant. So our government gives Mama Maria 1,800 to survive for a monthly base. But now, due to electricity issues, she is spending more, in making a point that the kids are going to school while having bath, washed, and prepare lunch boxes. Mama Maria Matawa also stated that their life is in danger because sometimes she can't afford to buy paraffin, nor to go and buy some amalahle, which is coal. So what will they do? They will go to a field to look for some firewoods, and it's very dangerous because at some point she must leave the house at about 5:30 to go collect some firewoods, and she is an old woman. And nowadays we all aware that there is a high rate of gender-based violence. She might be raped, most of the things might happen to her, but because she is a woman and a brave woman, not just a woman, she makes it a point that she goes there to collect some firewood to feed the family. And in a monthly base, they spend 2,000 Rand for food, 840 for paraffin. They spend 1,000 for transport for the school kids. They spend 1,000 plus for clothes. So the Matawa family, they realize that in fact, their life belongs or is determined by having electricity and heat. Lastly, she is not healthy health-wise. She is sugar diabetic, and she normally uses injection, which is called insulin, to inject herself. So it's also a challenge for Mama Matawa to keep the insulin in the fridge because she doesn't have electricity. And that insulin needs to be refrigerated. So the question that, in fact, it's not a question, she said to me while doing a research, we were never known that we were voting for this. Why is this happening to a Black person? Thank you, Comrade Trevor. May I please go to my other last slide, I think. So what is on the screen now, here in Soweto, we call it green box, while the ESCOM people, they call it smart meter. One will tell one now that there's nothing smart about that box. As ESCOM, they say it's a smart meter. First of all, that box can make you go to bed hungry because you cannot rely on that electricity that is being generated today. Why one is saying that? Because when you recharge your electricity with 100 Rand, you in your machine, it will say 64 Rand. The big question for us as Sowetan is, where is the rest of the amount goes? Because when you recharge your own phone with 100 Rand, it will come saying 100 Rand. And why with a green box or a smart meter, it doesn't say the same? First of all, as Sowetans, we were never informed that ESCOM is going to install green boxes. Worst of all, most of our grandparents and other people were forced to sign for green boxes because they were scared not to have electricity at all. So what the research came across is that people now, they are crying to say what they need is reliable, affordable, and safe and clean energy. Maybe I can come back to that as my conclusion. What does that mean for the entire community? People's life must come first before profits. Why one chose that point on my key points is that we've noticed that our leaders, our government, they put our people's life at stake or at risk for profits. We've seen happening with the insulins and not being refrigerated. We've seen that most of our people, they have or they are using oxygen machines in their homes. If there's no electricity, how are you going to use that oxygen? Because you need electricity to generate or to use that machine. So it's clear that our government and our ESCOM people, they think for their own stomach and not for the entire communities or the country. Even worse, it's also dangerous to generate electricity using coal. We've seen what has happened years ago, even now in Sosolbek and in Pumalanga areas. Even here in Soweto, there are mountains which are called Intabamhlope. Intabamhlope, it's been a sign that our health are at stake due to what electricity is being generated. Coming to my last key points. The future of our kids must not be affected by poor governance and leadership. Most of the schools, especially in Sunnyvale, Dube, Meadowlands, Shawela, are going to school without taking bath, without eating, and it's not even safe to do their homework anytime after 5:30 because they have to rely in the sunlight to do their homework, and it's not even safe for them to use a candle on their own since they are school kids. And as a school child, you have a right to dignity too as a child, because you cannot not go to school without having breakfast, without having bath. So my last point, Comrade Chair, is that the Sowetans said on the research, electricity is a basic need, not a luxury want. Why one? They were saying that because electricity is very expensive and no one is doing a popular education to educate Sowetans on how a kilowatt hour is being costing them. And they've seen on the news that Eskom is owing a well bank. So the big question that they have is that who must pay a well bank on behalf of Eskom, which means is us as the end users of electricity. And worst of all, we are suffering as South Africans. No, we are water scarce country, and Eskom is washing their coal to generate electricity using tons and tons of water. I'd like to rest there for now. And there are 3 slogans that came out of the research to say, umtomnyama uyahlupheka, umtomnyama ulala angadlile, umtomnyama uyafa yinqele. Meaning, umtomnyama is suffering, a black person is suffering, a black person can go to bed without having food, a black person is dying of cold, not cold, sorry. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you so much, Cleo. Thank you for that. We have heard that people are financially struggling due to COVID, so they are even more burdened due to lack of electricity. They are even facing more challenges, such as socially, financially. We have heard how businesses have been affected due to lack of electricity. People could no longer feed themselves as they used to be, and people's lives have been disrupted in many ways. So I'm going to call upon our second speaker, Ms. Alice Mporo. Ms. Alice is an MA candidate at Arizona State University, USA, and she's an intern at the Center for Sociological Research and Practice, University of Johannesburg. She's a licensed social worker with 7 years experience working with clients of diverse backgrounds and sexualities. The areas of expertise include training, mentoring on issues such as sexual reproductive health rights and gender identities. So Alice, I'm giving you 15 minutes as well. So thank you. Over to you, Alice.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Lydia. Yes, and so I'll basically just be reiterating on everything that Lydia and Cleo has already spoken about. So, Dr. Wane, can you please either give me options to share my screen or share my presentation? Perfect. Right. So as I've said, what I chose to do was to then look at, focus more on the disadvantages that have kind of snowballed into the consequences that resulted from the lack of electricity. So as Cleo and Lydia have already spoken on the second slide. Second slide, yes. So looking into the everyday lived experiences of the people in Soweto affected and impacted by the electricity crisis, with the focus on how the lack of electricity has led to the snowballing disadvantages in their everyday lives. So one thing that came up from the research participants was the increased crime rates, the increased living expenses, and of course, unemployment as touched by Cleo, and the business foreclosures, having lost their businesses due to either the pandemic having affected the means of generating income, and of course, not being able to have any source of power to then for their resources that they need in order to keep the businesses afloat. Dr. Ngwane, I'm going to go through this quite quickly because most of the points have already been touched by Cleo and Lydia. So one of the issues that came up from the participants as well, which was a variety of them, was the increased crime rates. And if you look at the slides that is showed here, that in the year between the crime in Soweto has gone up in different areas. For instance, the worries of their homes being broken into and things being stolen. In the year of 2021 alone, it went up to 79.17%. In the different concerns due to the lack of electricity. So some of the participants were actually stating the difficulty with having to wake up in the morning, going to work because of fear of being mugged and robbed. As stated there, it's also one of the crime rates that have actually increased since the lack of electricity. Worries of their cars being stolen. There's also been an increase of carjackings within the Soweto areas, and worries of being attacked personally. So in addition to the increased crime rates, so Soweto residents have had to come up with creative measures, as mentioned by Cleo, using the use of paraffin or even self-generating electricity. Now, the most popular one, especially in some of the business owners, has been the use of gas cylinders or the use of generators. So if you see from the slide here, a gas cylinder alone is cost, and that's a 5 kg cylinder with the cost of 550. And that is not even filled up. So if you want to go and fill it up, a refill is 228 a month, which means for a pensioner like Gogo Sbongile, who actually was one of the participants that opted to use gas, if you decide to use gas for both cooking, warming of water, for kids to go to school, for hot water and so forth, that 228 will have to be refilled at least twice a week. I've actually tried with this in my house, where I've actually used the gas heater for a week, and I had to refill twice in that week in order to just use it every day. So you can imagine what it's like if you're using it also to generate your gas stoves and heaters and so forth. Some of the participants have also had to opt to use rechargeable lights, which increases the cost of everyday globes versus, the cost-effective measures. The generators as well, and this is a basic generator that could give power for a minimum, let's say an average Soweto home, a 4-room house, which is about 5,499. So if you're living like an average Soweto resident, where the unemployment rate has been high in South Africa as a whole, Soweto accounting for about 30% of the, South African unemployment is about 32.6% overall in the first quarter of 2021, right? And it went from 32.5 in the quarter of 2020. Now, Stats SA, for some reason, looks at Soweto as having about 30%. I don't know how they calculated that. 30% of residents accounting for the 32.6% of unemployment in Soweto, right? Then you have some of the residents that are pensioners on a salary of, a pension grant of 800, having to use a generator for 5.4. That already means that it's something that they aren't able to afford. So they have to opt for other means, either the gas or the previously stated means of coal or paraffin stove and wood, which aren't necessarily safe or even hygienic for certain purposes. Now, the generators are mainly used by the small business owners. No, that's okay, you can move on. Yes. So generators are mainly used by the small business owners in order to create power or to stay afloat, right? So one of the local business owners actually mentioned he has to spend about 3,000 plus minus 3,000 on a daily to fill up the generator, as he actually has to drive from Soweto to the nearest petrol station and come back with that. So on a day, because the generator can't stay afloat for the rest of the day, so he actually has to do 2 trips, having bought about 2 generators. But he's also had to retrench a few of the staff members that he's had in order to supplement the funds that he had so that he can maintain the increased cost of actually having to stay afloat. And this is in light of the current COVID-19 pandemic, where the restrictions, for instance, the lockdown restrictions have also already impacted businesses in the sense that they're not making as much as return for their businesses as they used to. They're not getting as much traffic into the business as well. And they've now also had to increase prices in the area because it costs them a lot more to stay afloat, to stay open, but also to pay for the staff that they have and to go and, to go get to stock up on things to sell. So that has also kind of created a detrimental snowballing consequence of the lack of electricity, in the sense that now the cost of living in Soweto itself has gone up. And with the current crisis in the looting, that has also now impacted Soweto residents, where some of the local stores that they have having been looted has led to them now having to find secondary means of getting basic needs and basic resources. And this is in addition to already not having electricity, already in addition to the current load shedding schedule, on top of, there's also load shedding and load reduction in Soweto as well. And most of the local townships, especially the Black populated areas, have been impacted by this. So most of the participants have actually reiterated that it wasn't a matter of them not wanting to pay for the electricity, but more so to have they aren't able to keep up with the expensive power, the electrical source that they have to pay from the prepaid meters as well, which includes also having to buy water prepaid. So yes, in conclusion, I think the last thing we can say is basically the E in South Africa stands for electricity, which doesn't exist. Thank you, Lydia. Thank you, Dr. Ngwani, I'm done.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sir Alice, and breaking it down so that it will actually, electricity has increased the cost of living for many people in Soweto. And it is seemed to be, the situation has become extra for many people, because people have to buy the extra sources of energy, which are way more expensive than electricity. So we are going to have our discussant, who is Dr. Spello. So I'm going to read his bio, and then I'm going to give him the chance. Dr. Spello Ngwangu is a currently senior researcher at the Sociology Department, University of Johannesburg. His research focuses on skills development, education and the economy, youth unemployment, racial inequality, and the restructuring of work. His recent research focuses on youth unemployment, challenges in the township, such as of Davidton, Etwatwa, and Tembisa. So over to you, Dr. Spelo. Thank you.
Thanks, Lydia, and good afternoon to the colleagues. Nice to see you again, Lydia, after a while.
Yes.
Yeah, these have been very interesting inputs from the colleagues. Really exciting and very interesting research, and quite critical in the stage that we are in as a society. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to raise 4 issues, which I think about these 4 issues that I'm raising as kind of provocations, okay? So these 4 issues are basically, I can outline them and then I'm going to go into them. The first issue I want to talk about is the context of race and energy in South Africa. And I've put that there because the central theme of this series of workshops is energy racism. Then I want to talk about energy and the process of democratization in South Africa. In other words, the political transition. Then I'll reflect briefly on the methodologies and the research that the colleagues have done and the inputs that they've made. And then at the end, I'll try to raise some ideas that maybe could contribute conceptually to the analysis that is going to be done. So I hope, Lydia, I can do that in sort of less than 10 minutes. So I think for me, the research is quite critical in the sense that the theme that the CSRP has adopted of energy racism, I think it brings to sharp focus structural questions or questions of structural racism in South Africa and how these things play out in the context of energy. Okay, we hear that the research is concentrated in Soweto, basically a Black community, Black working class community, with a focus of understanding those living conditions. So that context of race and energy is important for me because it also speaks in a way to kind of unequal distribution of resources. Okay, and with energy being the main, with energy being the main focus, because the question of distribution of resources is crucial when we talk about the idea of social redress in South Africa, given our political history. And already, just from the research experiences that colleagues have shared, one can see that there are questions of spatial inequalities that are rising as a result and being worsened as a result of this energy issue, okay, and this electricity crisis problem. And at the core of the problems that are related to the energy issue is how the country is approaching the crisis at Eskom, okay? And it's linked to the discussion that I think you had last week or the week before, where we were discussing the situation at Eskom, so I won't go into that. But the bigger, the larger context in my view is that, so where do we locate energy racism in that context? And how have the sort of post-apartheid reforms perpetuated these inequalities, or at least been unable to resolve these racial inequalities? Okay, and as a result, this informs the terrain in which these energy resources are rolled out or are allocated. Okay, because we're talking about a situation of lived realities. But the question of energy is central in South Africa's political economy when we talk about the shift from the apartheid era to the democratic era. Scholars, for instance, like Ben Fine and Rustomji, talk about the mineral energy complex, as very central to the South African political economy and the accumulation path of the capitalist economy in South Africa. Okay, and even there, Eskom plays a crucial role as this monopolistic entity, which also is part of these regulatory systems about energy. So this brings into account questions of production and consumption of that energy, okay? And in more recent times, there's now a lot of serious concentrated discussions around renewable energy, okay? I could see also in the chat, there's already some discussions about the shift to the usage or the need for the usage of renewable energy. And some of the literature and some of the public discussion is also now starting to talk about questions about how should that renewable energy or green energy be owned, right? Should we not be talking about this renewable energy to be socially owned so that we avoid the dangers of rerunning the same problems that we have with ESCOM? On a more global scale, there's a continuous discussion with climate change and so forth about the notion of a just transition, right? From coal to a more energy efficient, but at the same time, environmentally friendly energy system. But what I like about this research is that while there are these big macro discussions going on in South Africa and in the world, it brings into focus the other end of the discussion, the people. You know, it brings a human dimension because it looks at poor communities, particularly poor Black communities, who basically have the least access to energy and yet are most affected by the decisions around, for instance, pricing and the availability of electricity. A few years ago, the ANC had made a lot of promises around indigent communities, free electricity, free water, and so forth. But seemingly, even those interventions are not actually helping to address the situation. So I thought, for me, those are some of kind of the framing issues that I find very interesting with this question of energy racism. It brings into account the broader discussions we have about racial inequalities in South Africa. And I found also the fact that your research, so now my third point I wanted to talk about is to talk about the research and how you have gone about it. I was hoping you would also sort of talk about the research experience and how you found doing the research, because doing research now under conditions of COVID has become very complex because of us being unable to interact directly with each other or physically face-to-face because of the pandemic. And also, you know, the ease with which you were able to access the participants. What I liked, especially from the first presentation from Comrade Cleo, is the fact that it's quite clear that the approach that you are taking is an approach that is not researching on the community, quote unquote, but I think you're trying to embrace an approach of researching with the community, which is what's another aspect that I like, because you've helped us in your research to look at the human aspects of this electricity crisis and not just the more sort of technical explanations about what is going on with the electricity crisis. So that's what issue. So what it does, I mean, what it got me thinking is the importance of hearing those voices. You know, that's why I kind of acknowledge that what this research helps us to do is to hear the voices of the people who are the most affected by this electricity crisis. For an example, to have an entire community without electricity for a month. In that community, there are workers. In that community, there are students, for instance, at UJ, who we are teaching, you know, and you expect the student to log on to a live lecture or to log on to Blackboard, and they don't even have electricity. You know, what are we saying? I mean, this has also got implications from the broader society, and those are also working families who need to earn an income. And then on top of it, as Cleo said, there's a kind of double thing, or at least another pandemic, because there's the COVID, but there are people sitting without electricity. So, but from a research, again, from a research point of view, this question of reflexivity is quite important. I'm thinking also about the students to actually talk about our positionality when we're doing this kind of research. You know, what do we experience also when we research fields that we are familiar with? You know, when we're going into communities, not in the classical sense of being outsiders, where we're actually insiders, you know, in that community. I think it's important that we speak about that, what dynamics does it bring? You know, what kind of entry or what kind of difficulties do we have? What kind of barriers do we have? But also what kind of experiences do we have when we do this kind of research? Okay, it's not always given that researchers have easy access. Sometimes there is resistance to researchers. You know, it's not always easy. But a whole lot of variables are at play, including language, including other social dynamics of how to access, including the fact that, of course, we can access our own comrades. So the style of the research that we do is very important, because a lot of people are also skeptical about university-based researchers who come into communities, collect the data. You know, it's called the helicopter approach to doing research, where people come into a community, collect the data, and they leave, you know. So these are the kind of things that I think it was quite important to hear how you were approaching your research. So my last issues, I think they connect to possibly when you get to the next stage, that is your analysis after you've collected all your data. The more sort of conceptual things, you know, what does this kind of research tell us, you know, about, and how can we build on it to sort of really make analysis? I think for me, my point is very simple, that quite clearly these crises, you leave the pandemic, the energy crisis, the environmental crisis, the financial crisis, they are showing us that life under capitalism for many people has become increasingly unbearable, you know, and that, I mean, if you're talking now about a double crisis, it could be a triple crisis or even quadruple crisis with, when you add poverty, unemployment, and inequality. So I think that kind of framing is quite important. I recall what one Professor Kopano Ratele said in one of his researches. He talked about livable lives in unlivable conditions. You know, that kind of, I think he was doing research on young males and violence. I think he was doing research on that. He used this notion of livable lives, but unlivable conditions, you know. And I think that's what is one thing that is framing, or at least that you know, could inform your analysis from what I can see. And this notion of energy racism, in my view, brings also a question about the general discussion about energy, because the field of energy is very busy, you know. There's the language of sustainability. Then there's talk of green energy. And then there's other kind of talk about the environment and energy and the future and so forth, climate change and all of this. But I think this approach of energy racism has got a very specific location in it. You know, these are not conditions that prevail in white communities, okay? So it shows the perpetuation of the inequalities in our society, and energy playing a role in those inequalities, okay? Yes, we will probably talk, and probably other people are very interested about this idea of a green revolution. And what would that hold for us? You know, where will that lead us? What kind of context, or what kind of social relations will that also produce? And who's going to own this green energy? And again, what does it do to the relations, the intersectional question about race, class, and gender? Okay. And then, of course, there are larger questions like the question of racial capitalism that kind of does find expression when we talk about who gets access to what kind of energy, and who gets access to which resources, and who actually owns, you know, those means of production. So it's a very, and in our context of our country, these take the form of this racialized capitalism, okay, or at least racial inequalities. Yeah, yeah, I think maybe I can just leave it there, but this has been very interesting, and I'll be very keen to hear how other colleagues are responding to the provocation. I see these as kind of provocations. The colleagues don't need to respond directly to this, but I'm just raising issues that came to mind to me when I think about this and the larger theme of energy racism from that sociological kind of way perspective. Okay, yeah, thanks, Lydia. I hope I didn't chow too much time.
Thank you, Dr. Spello. No, you were right on time. I'm going to open the floor, but before that, I can share with you a little bit of our experiences doing research in Soweto during the time of COVID. At first, the first group of people that we interviewed, most of the people were elderly people. So it was very much difficult to talk to them over the phone. Sometimes they will be constantly saying, I can't hear you, and all network on top of the electricity crisis that we have. So sometimes I don't know whether there's a connection between network and electricity, because people will tell you that if I don't have electricity, it means that I cannot hear you, that they've got network problems. So we had all those network problems as well. So yeah, I'll open the floor to everyone to ask questions. I'll take maybe rounds of threes and then we can continue. Thank you. You can raise your hand. Oh, yeah, you can raise your hand. Okay, so long. It seems like people are still thinking. I'll be reading what.
Chair, I see 3 hands. It's Arwa, Piri, Trisha, and Rocho. Oh, I see 3 hands.
I don't know whether it's my network or what. Hello? Oh, God.
We can hear you, Lydia, but just click on participants.
Oh, you can hear me.
Yeah, and then you'll see there's 3 hands. So we could just start with Arwa, like Cleo is suggesting.
Okay, okay. Arwa, we can take your question.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the amazing presentations. It was very insightful. My question is directed to Cleopatra. It's actually like just a comment. Actually, it's not even a question. So as I'm picking up that the electricity crisis is also spilling into other intersectionalities and is causing like your poverty and unemployment to skyrocket. Now, how do these people who are affected by this, how do they refrain from adding to the crime rates in the country and carry on making money in an ethical way when the government is taking so much away from them through the electricity crisis? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Arwa. We can take the second person, Trish.
Hi, thanks, Lydia. I have a quick one because I just wanted to ask what exactly is happening in Sun Valley and what has been the researchers' involvement in trying to resolve that question? Like, what has been Eskom's excuse, if any? Because that seems very, very strange and unfair to people, even if they're unpaying. Like a year of no power is a bit too much.
Okay, thank you. We can take your question.
Okay, I have 2, but then there's this one that I had, and it derived from what Mr. C. Pello was saying with regards to positionality. So I wanted to ask researchers, as a researcher, what do you do when you come across a number of Sowetans who are saying, no, we do not buy electricity, we have never bought electricity, thus we breach? Do you then omit this information? Or what? What do you do with that kind of information? Another question that I had was with regards to both Alice and Cleo mentioned that Sowetans do want to buy electricity, or they would they would buy it. However, because it's expensive, they fail to. Therefore, my questions with that regard is that, is there proof of this payment from residents, or you just taking their word? Thank you.
Thank you so much for the questions. I think Cleo is the right person to respond. Cleo, can you respond to them?
Thank you, Lydia. So may I please start with the last question. Okay, so yes, so there is a proof that here in Soweto, we were buying electricity. As I'm speaking, I have a electricity prepaid box, but because Eskom is overcharging us, we took a decision to say, no, let's not pay. And Eskom came to disconnect us. Then we bought our own second breaker as the communities. Then we reconnected ourselves. So there's nothing wrong if you feel that that gate must be on that direction and not on that direction, if I may do an example. So we are not owing Eskom any explanation by doing so, because they didn't even inform us, and they took decision about us without consulting us, of which it's a problem for us as the end users of electricity. I have proof of people who have receipts, even now in Sunnyvale, Pimville, and Dube. There are people, Orlando, there are people who are also affected now, while they have a 2 weeks receipt or so. So Eskom must just leave us on grid, and we go green by generating our own energy from solar, wind, and hydro. Coming to the question asked by Trisha, our research proved that in so many consecutive time, the community members, they've met with Eskom people, and I think Finish is here on the call, can agree with me. They've met with Eskom people more than once, and they took petitions, they marched, they even went to Bramfontein in the main office of Eskom, and nothing is happening. Instead, Eskom and community leaders, which their councillors, they are playing a draft dodge game. So communities, they were requested to pop out some money, 6,000 per household to buy a cable. They did that, and now Eskom is just not interested in fixing the problem at Sunnyvale. May I please be reminded, what was the other question?
So my question is with regards to how people in Soweto, right, this energy crisis is affecting them in different parts, like it's driving unemployment, it's really just affecting like the poverty rates and all of that. So my question is, how do they refrain from, you know, adding to a cycle of like crime and increasing the crime rates, because it's now just becoming like a huge cycle of, you know, your basic needs are being taken away and you need to find other means to you know, continue just making money for yourself. How do you continue making money in an ethical way and refrain from crime when the government is taking so much away from the people of Soweto and in Sun Valley?
Okay, may I please leave that question to Alice? But I do understand what you are saying. Then may I please attempt to respond in some of the provocations. First of all, even here on the call, most of the people whom we've interviewed, they are on the call. And yes, the research is based on let's work together rather than let's work alone. That is why we are in this status crisis, because our leaders, they worked alone and they took decisions without us, but for us, of which that is a problem. Even with the green boxes, I don't think if the ESCOM and the councillors did their job in doing a popular education in most of the communities, we were going to have a problem, because most of the problems, we were going to foresee it coming and try to meet the ESCOM and our leaders halfway as the end users of electricity. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Cleo. Alice, do you want to respond, or we can have another round of questions?
So I think Cleo has responded to the question that you were saying I should respond to, but I just wanted to highlight, I think, is it Rofa Tuchezwa, to say, for instance, we're just trying to highlight that some of the members of Soweto, citizens of Soweto, have actually been paying for electricity. So but they've been disconnected in more of a collateral damage situation based on the majority that are then viewed to have illegally connected.
Okay. Thank you, Alice. We're going to take another round of questions. I can see we have got Nicole and the Bukiwe. So Nicole, we can take your question.
Sure, thank you. So my question is for Cleo, because you mentioned the example of the lady who lives in Soweto and who is affected by the crisis, but this lady also experiences the risk of gender-based violence that comes when she goes to collect firewood. So to me, it seems to me that this energy crisis also has a gendered impact next to the racial perspective. So I was wondering if there are other examples of this gendered nature of this crisis and how we could address this in the research. Thank you.
Thank you. Who was the other person? Tim, we can take your question.
Hello, Lydia. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for your presentations. Cleo, I really enjoyed yours and all the other colleagues on the panel. I don't necessarily have much of a question. I have more of a comment. My comment is mainly around the issue of when we think of electricity and the electricity crisis, we also focus mainly on the social dynamics between the people. And I think that's very important, that's very critical. But I think also what struck me quite well was when Cleo was talking about the smart box. And when she showed that picture of the smart box, it made me realize that, you know, the smart box and not having the electricity being connected or disconnected, it actually just shows also how powerful actual things, whether it's a smart box or a smart whatever, how powerful those things are in the daily lives of people in Soweto, but also in the broader electricity crisis. And I think another critical thing that's also stood out for me in the presentation, which I liked a lot, I think is the stories which you shared, Cleo, about the women and how they experience this, and actually not having enough light and going out to fetch firewood. All those things are all just shows how powerful the lack of the specific thing of not having electricity is in people's lives. It shapes how they interact, it shapes where they go, and it shapes their daily work and their lives. So yeah, it's just a comment, but thank you very much, Cleo and everybody else for this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll just read one or two questions, and then I'll give the presenters a chance to respond. Can you be brief so that we can accommodate other people? It says partly one of the reasons Soweto is suffering because of because of the accumulated debt. Is it possible for this debt to be written off? I know this sounds cliche, but will this research lead us to that direction, or is it just remaining on the book? After it's written off, would education about the green boxes and tariff breakdown help settle this payment, less units and green boxes mystery? My other question was on positionality. What do you do as a researcher when you come across Soweto residents who are saying, no, we do not buy electricity, never have, thus we bridge it. As a researcher from Soweto, do you omit this information? What do you do with that information? So I don't know whether Dr. Ngwane would like to respond to the issue of positionality and omission of bridging and everything. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, on the question of people not paying, it depends where you position yourself. So there's a lot of what I can call dominant ideology, you know, that there is nothing for mahala and that everything you get, someone is paying for, which might be true, but the question is, who is paying? So it depends how you go, how wide, you know, the lens you use, the perspective you use in answering the question of who is paying. So I would say that if we look at it broadly, especially in class terms, we will find that the Black working class in particular, and the people of Soweto specifically, have paid 1,000 times, you know, for the cost of energy, which is enjoyed, especially by industry in South Africa. So for example, you know, there are those two twin towers in Soweto, you know, the cooling towers. That was the Orlando power station, which has been there for decades. And under apartheid, it was peddling electricity, you know, for white areas. And Sowetans did not get any of that electricity. The only thing they got was the fumes from the pollution. And it was Sowetans, the working class, the workers of Soweto, you know, the men and women of Soweto, the sons and daughters, who were working in that power station, which they didn't enjoy the electricity from. But more broadly, you know, who was digging the gold? Who was laying out the pylons, electricity pylons? So the working class of South Africa, the Black workers in particular, have paid, you know, a great, great price for what we now call modernity and what we now demand cash, you know, on the table. And in fact, we all know that, you know, under apartheid, Black people in particular were severely disadvantaged. But now, with freedom, with liberation, the tables are turned. It's now we say, hey, we're all equal now, so everyone must pay, and everyone is ignoring, you know, some of the past disadvantages, those legacies which people still carry today. If someone was injured, damaged, or traumatized by apartheid, how is that trauma or injury or damage suddenly disappear because the ANC is now running the government? It doesn't. But this is the ideology that now the playing fields are equal, everyone must pay. So the whole talk about a Soweto electricity debt, about the culture of entitlement, personally, I think to follow some of the things Dr. Ngwangu was saying, you know, it's part of the ideology of undermining the people's demands for equality and for access to services, which I think they're entitled to, which they fought for and which they already produced with their own labor. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ngwane. There is one more person who have raised their hand. I think it's Vukiwa. Vukiwa, we can take your question.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Lydia. I enjoyed your presentation, and unfortunately, and I hope you'll be able to share with me the recording, because my laptop just switched off while while Ms. Mporo was speaking, so I didn't get much of her presentation. So I just want to also follow up on Spero on the things that he raised while he was talking, and also I think one of the people have raised this on the chat. So I think it's Whitney. So, but will this research lead us to that direction, or is it just remaining on the book? And I feel like this question is always raised in spaces where there are discussions like this, like to what point, like our research, the research that we do, where does it go? Like, will it be able to change the communities that we are researching? And while I was looking at your pictures, Lydia, and I felt like this is all social research is, like sort of like exposing these things, like exposing the primal stuff, exposing that kind of life of Black people. And I'm trying to understand, like, okay, so we have seen like how they are suffering. So what is the next step? Of which I think that question now I would ask Prof. Sinwell and Prof. Dr. Ngwane, like, what is the research that you are doing? Like, what does it do? How does it change the communities that we are researching? And I feel like the way that the education system or research is structured is such in a way that it only highlights these bad things that are happening in these Black communities, and that it lives there. The light remains in that house where there are those 4 primer stove, and then the research is done, and there's nothing that we have done to change those people's lives. So now I'm questioning the kind of the studies that we are doing. What are they for? Is it just for us to get the degrees? And I feel like this question is asked everywhere I go. Yeah, I don't know if we can touch on that. And also with what Mr. Spello raised, I would like to find out from the lecturers how they've addressed the issue of online learning with students who are facing not only the fact that they don't have computers, also they are facing also the pandemic issues and also the electricity cuts. So how do lecturers respond to such? Because you'll find that sometimes a student will not submit an assessment or an assignment, and they will say to you, I did not have electricity during that time if the deadline is at 4 o'clock. And if you receive an email from a student saying that we had a power cut, how do lecturers attend such issues that come from students? Yeah, I don't know. It's a comment and also a question in there. Thank you.
Thank you, Bukiwe. I don't know, Prof. Luke and Dr. Ngwane, do you want to respond to that?
I mean, I think those are absolutely fantastic, fundamental questions about the role of research potentially in social change, and also how it speaks to how the mainstream, we talked about this in class 2 days ago, the mainstream ivory tower sort of approach, which we are in a way embedded within, but also trying to experiment with ways to advance beyond. So we're trying to create a different way of doing research. And I think Clio, this project is only a few months old. So, you build relationships with people. There was obviously pre-existing relationships that have made the research possible between activists who have been present in these communities, but we're now only in the process of actually, it's a socially constructed process. So we're in the process of actually putting, creating the kinds of, hopefully some kind of transformative approach that we can develop over time. But I think Cleo hit it on the head when she was giving her presentation, when she was giving her response, because she said, let's walk together rather than walking alone. Our leaders walked alone and took decisions about us without us. So we don't want to reproduce the same kinds of top-down, or what we've called extractive forms of research, and we want to involve people in the actual process of doing the research and analyzing it. So 3 weeks from now, we'll be, having some of the community members raising these, hopefully raising these exact kinds of questions that people have been asking. Because I heard somebody else also ask, what are you doing about the condition? But it's not only the condition that we've been highlighting in these presentations, the condition or the experience, but it's also about the responses and the alternatives. So I think it's a very important sort of like open-ended question, which we can't quite resolve now, but which we need to have, in the background, but also ideally in the forefront, as we engage in these processes, and as we risk falling back into the extractive approach as well, because there will be report writing, and then you can see that people get written out of that. Maybe you will so I think it's something we need to keep there. In terms of lecturing and people, one of my students just emailed me now saying, I don't have electricity, so I might not be able, so we record our lectures. I know we don't do everything. But we bend over backwards and have sleepless nights in order to make sure that we leave open the space for submissions, regardless of whether or not people have had electricity. So we actually extend, I think we overextend sometimes the boundaries for submissions, because we take the students, we take what the students say as the truth. And then, if they say they've been cut off, we give them time. I know it doesn't address, the issue fully, but we try. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Lydia, can I just jump in briefly?
Yes, I can give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, no, I was going to say I agree with Luke totally. One of the things I raised in my comments in the seminar, one of the things I raised was the issue that I said, for me, the research is significant because it is about hearing the voices of those whose voices are often not heard in these discussions or even not acknowledged. That the general discussion about energy and the energy crisis, at least in the public domain in South Africa, comes across largely from big policy players. If it's not ESCOM, it's the government. If it's not the government, it's the World Bank, whatever, all those role players. Often we don't hear these voices of a Magogo in a township who's now going for a month without electricity. What happens to her grandchildren? What happens to her family? That for me is the significance of that kind of voice of a sociologist bringing into focus, or of a social scientist, bringing into focus those hidden narratives or those things that are not easily or are not always paid attention to in details, right? So that for me is the importance of it. Not to say that researchers have also the additional responsibility to actually make the change, but they have a very important contribution to actually inform the decision makers and bring that perspective into focus. I think for me, that was a part of it, and a part of what I wanted to make, because as Luke says, often the university-based academics are criticized about the style of knowledge production that we have. We go into a community, we get the data, we leave, But what I was pointing out is that the team has conceptualized this in a way that's very involved. By the way, like as an example, the idea of the feedback, That is ethics. That is what is called triangulation, you know, and testing trustworthiness, where you don't just leave people, but you also engage them about their own views of what you've done. That's also part of that kind of research. So that's the point. I just wanted to repeat what I actually said earlier. Thanks. Oh yes, sorry. On the students, I also agree with Luke. We do all that we can when we are lecturing students to ask them about their situation at home. Have they got access to electricity and so forth? And we try to give them as many opportunities and be flexible and accommodative. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'll just read about 2 questions in our chat box as we go towards the end. It says, the crisis raises in the international dehumanization and suffering that has not been interrupted by advent of democracy. Is it time to redefine and reimagine a new social contract and what a constitutional democracy means? As emerging from everyday resistances by poor and working class, how do we interrupt this intergenerational suffering? And then the other one, it says, it was mentioned that the old women and the community did not know that they were voting for the energy crisis, if I'm not mistaken. Will there be a difference in terms of the energy crisis if people voted for another party? And should another party take over? Is the damage done not too much for another party to try and fix it? Okay, I'll ask here from the team if anyone wants to respond to that. And then after that, can you just respond briefly? Can we also share our research experiences or research challenges that we came across when we were conducting research during this time of COVID? Thank you. Can anyone please take those questions?
I see Mbata's hand. Maybe he wants to respond to other few questions.
Okay, but you can respond.
Actually, I don't want to respond. I just want to comment and add other things that your research learned in the community. Kios stated that in most cases, the community leaders and community are engaging the stakeholder, the ESCOM and the councillors. But at the end, there's no the implementation of what is being demanded by communities. And what it says that in most of these communities, especially like the Black working class communities, we find that there's a lot of load shedding and load reduction. And then you ask yourself that are these working class paying for those who eat money in ESCOM? Because I mean, if they're going to say Soweto is owing billions, I mean, ask yourself about the CEOs, the board there, they've eaten a lot of money or due to corruption, in fact. As we know that since last year, I mean, we had this lockdown, the hard lockdown that was imposed in March. Most people lost their jobs. That's just true. So how do you expect people to pay for electricity that they don't have because they don't have jobs? Sometimes people, I mean, they follow the protocols, they do every means to communicate or to engage with the officials and authorities. But at the end, there's no respond from them or any action or an interaction. For example, in Sunnyville, they have without electricity for more than a year. Not that ESCOM don't know, they know, but we should ask ourselves why. Because one of participants said she lived in Dubai. She said we once had this problem of transformer that passed, so we didn't have electricity for a couple of days, but they came and fixed it. Then the question is, why they don't fix transformers in some even other areas of Soweto and Orange Farm? So with this regard, you can see that because there's a GMPD in that area of the proof of Dube, that's why they fix it. That means they don't care about the working class and the poor. Either they get this electricity or not. So and also see that in areas like in Sentin and other areas, they're not like lockdown, they're not like load shading and real section. If there is, they give them schedule, and it doesn't last forever. It takes like a couple of hours, and then it is back. But if you look into Soweto and other areas like working class areas, you find that they don't even stay with that electricity for days, months. Now we have Sunville for a year, and probably at Orange Farm that stays longer than that. So we can see that the way capitalism works, or how these authorities do their thing is basically looking into the interest of the capital or the bosses, because they're the one who get electricity. And probably in most factories and mines, they pay lesser than the other people in Soweto and other communities. Unfortunately, yesterday, NARSA agreed to the tariff that it should be up. So I can imagine during this lockdown, when people have lost their jobs, how are they going to access electricity? You can blame people from reconnecting themselves, but if they follow protocols and engage and there's nothing happening, they're going to have an alternative, to say how do we deal with this electricity? And the more community are united, the better. And also in this research, I found that most people are not united, even in the same area, where you find that some people agree to the green boxes, prepaid meter, some don't, And in Sunnyvale, you find that there are certain houses that they have these smart meters or prepaid meters. They haven't been activated for years, So you ask yourself, why ESCOM introduced this and they don't do or finish their work? So are they for the people or are they for the capital? This is a question you need to ask, because it's very sad that you find an old woman who's on support machine and there's no electricity. How is she going to survive? You have students who used to reside in Soweto in Pimville from UJ. They have to leave the area because there's no electricity. And the guy who who owns those accommodation had to lose income because no one wants to stay in a place where there's no electricity. You can't access Wi-Fi. We should probably ask ourselves there, not question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mbata. Thank you. I don't know, there was one question, I think, but it was responded to by Demarco. So I don't know, Dr. Ngwane, do you have anything to say before we can close? Just 30 seconds.
Sorry, Chair. May I please come in before Dr. Ngwane? I've noted a few questions. Question number one is being raised by Tricia. So Tricia, yes, I fully agree with you that the next political party that might be a ruling party is going to have too much. But as what we need, it's a socially owned electricity, whereby no one will take a monopolistic measures in controlling over on how we have to use energy and how we generate energy. Just to share, in ESCOM, they had a plan that will happen after about 20 years, if not 50 years, to put containers with solar panels. But that they said they will start doing that in the rural areas where there is no electricity at all. But the question that we have, was what's going to happen here in Soweto, because we are facing electricity challenges now. So let us do, as communities, put our heads together to do that. We don't need voted leaders to take that decision for us without us. Coming to, there was a question about elderly people. Why did we interview elderly people? We didn't interview elderly people as per se. It's just that all these 3 rooms, RTP houses, and 4 rooms here in Soweto, they are owned by Abomkulu Nabokoko. So obviously we were interviewing them, even though others, we have youth like Abo Paul, Abo Putin, I can name them all, but we didn't share those here on the call, but we did interview young people. Then coming to bridging electricity, may I please correct the student that there's nothing like bridging. We reconnect electricity. There was the last question about debt being written off. I want to assure you, I can't remember who asked this question, that since from 1996, our leaders were calling our kokos and mkulus to the community offices to say they must come with their permits and whatever, their debts will be removed from the old debts. Up to date, that is not happening. And I tell you, I made an example that when you recharge your electricity with 100 Rand, it says 64 Rand. That's the other amount that doesn't show when you recharge is the means and ways of paying since from whatever year those debts. I'd like to rest there, Chair. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. I'll just say those one word, Lydia. Thank you. So, well, I'm very happy with this engagement because, and it's happening exactly, the way I was dreaming about it. Because as you can see, we haven't written our report. So we're not here presenting you with the report we've written. We're sharing with you, comrades, colleagues, friends, work in progress. And already, Spelo was giving us points about how to conceptualize the issue, how to develop the concept of energy racism. Some of the speakers were raising some fundamental questions, positionality, also about the substance of energy itself. So, this is a critical engagement of the research, with the research community and also hopefully with the communities directly involved. So next week, in 2 weeks' time, at the same time, I will present on developing the concept of energy racism based on our findings. I'll take some of the points Dr. Nwango was making. And then as Luke suggested, after that, the week after that, we'll have people from Sun Valley coming to speak with their own voice. So through doing this, we are indeed trying to create a different approach to conducting research. So your attendance, especially your participation, is very crucial, and it affirms what you are trying to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for your attendance. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. See you the week after next week. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you for today. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Very informative.
Bye.
Suzel, my long lost sister.
Hello, my sister. How are you? Let me show my face at least so you can see how I didn't wash today. How are you doing? Huh?
I'm okay. I'm okay.
So I see you just down the corridor from me.
Thank you for attending, eh?
Thank you very much for Trevor and other colleagues who invited us. We got the invite through the university a mailing list, yeah.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
We shall connect
Thank
soon.
you, Chair, for sharing us so well.
Yes, definitely. I think you made some really critical points about care work in the context of not having, of not having electricity. It's a lot more. Having to fetch firewood, having to do all these things, like double the amount of work that is being done if you would have had electricity in a way also. So yeah, that was a critical point, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lydia. You chaired very well.
Thank you, thank you.
She was good.
Yes, thank you, Trevor. Hello, I'm not sure with the other person in the group, but let me leave now. I can see you guys want to connect. So thank you very much for this platform. I'll definitely join next time again. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Oh my God, finally it's over.
You can say that again, yo.
Good job, Lydia. You did well.
Yo,
You held it down.
finally it's over.
Yeah.
And finally, Cleo, look at that. All in one gig, only 1,000 megabytes. And you managed to finish.
I said thank you. Yo. And
that's 1,000 megabytes. Bye, Dr. Ngwane. Please, can you manage? Ucleo is dramatic, and I don't have time for her drama. Ucleo is dramatic.
You take each and everything personal. That is why I said, what does thank you mean? What does thank you mean?
Listen,
how do you analyze thank you?
When you speak English, speak English. Don't direct translate. When you say a person, or what, I'm like, oh, what? What do you mean, or what? Or mean? Or what? Are we fighting now? Leo.
When you are taking things very personal, and listen,
I'm dealing with the financial stress of the center. Dr. Ngwane, let people know I'm dealing with a lot.
Sensitive. You are oversensitive, both of you.
It's not sensitive.
Oh, both of them.
Yeah, they're so sensitive in everything. They just become hypersensitive in everything.
No. But like some of the responses, I'm like, yes, you don't know it. I'm still fighting for money from white people here. And Nanjia, she's asking for more on top of the fact that we don't have.
I think most of the time, 100% of the time, you misunderstand me. And that is all.
Why don't you guys have a coffee or something? Maybe.
There's no coffee. Ucleo must just stop with her drama.
But anyway, you did a great job.
You did a great job. Look, all in the 1,000 megabytes. All of that was for no reason. All of that.
Bye-bye.
It was
bye-bye.
For you.
Bye-bye, Melo.
No, also,
Melo.
I sent the thingy. Did you guys let me just give the feedback for the airtime. Did you guys see? So apparently the cost center person who was supposed to be handling our invoice, Dr. Ngwane has been, I CC'd on the email. So we don't know whether she was fired. This morning we found out she was a ghost because I've been trying to get a hold of her. Bonnie is trying to get a hold of her. So she doesn't work for UJ anymore.
Oh,
nobody
really?
has our account. Like it's a mess. So now I'm dealing with being asked whether we are staff members or not. So I've just responded to the best. We have CC'd you in the email. So hopefully by today, somebody will provide some direction. But Uyo Liswa, who was responsible for our account, is no longer with UJ Procurement.
Okay.
Yeah.
UJ can be like that, Lee. Can be a mess.
I know.
We're just waiting to figure out who's gonna take over, whoever is responding. But I forwarded the thing in the group.
Okay. Well, thanks for trying. Thanks, Lydia. Well done.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. You did very well. Yeah.
Bye. Thank you.
It was a blast.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.